Imagine an industry that just um, loses $100 billion a year, like every single year.
Yeah, it's wild.
And they just accept it. They literally just write it off as, the standard cost of doing business. Just to sort of put that number into perspective for you, $100 billion is enough to fund the entire annual budget of a mid-sized state.
Oh, easily.
Right, like it could cover the salaries of hundreds of thousands of teachers, or you could build entirely new transit systems from scratch. It's this staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of money to just, well, let's slip through the cracks. But that is the actual current reality of America's healthcare system.
It really is. And I mean, it's a scale of loss that genuinely challenges human comprehension.
Yeah.
When you hear a number like $100 billion evaporating annually from programs like Medicare and Medicaid, your natural human reflex is to assume that there must be some massive, highly coordinated criminal syndicate pulling off the heist of the century, right?
Yeah, like some Ocean's 11 style operation or something?
Exactly. You picture these masterminds in a basement. But the reality, which is honestly fundamentally more unsettling, is that this loss isn't primarily the result of master criminals.
No.
No, it's structural. It is literally a systemic leak built into the very plumbing of the healthcare data infrastructure.
And that brings us to the focus of today's deep dive. We are unpacking an incredible blueprint laid out in Rapush Durulari's book, The $1 Billion Leak.
A fascinating read, really.
It is. We're going to explore this proposed 36-month implementation plan to completely reform America's healthcare integrity systems. The mission here for you, the listener, is to understand how you transition a trillion-dollar ecosystem from a leaky, reactive bucket into a proactive, precision-engineered operation.
Right, and it's not a small task.
Not at all. We are going to look at swapping out outdated auditing methods for real-time cloud analytics. And we'll look at how safety protocols from entirely different industries map directly onto medical billing. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Before we look at this massive 36-month roadmap, we really need to understand the structural design flaw that allows $100 billion to vanish in the first place. Like, why is the current system so vulnerable?
So to understand the flaw, we have to look at the sequence of events in the current reimbursement model. The industry refers to this as the pay and chase method.
Pay and chase. That already sounds inefficient.
It perfectly describes it, honestly. In our federal healthcare programs, the primary operational imperative is velocity. Claims need to be paid rapidly.
Just to keep things moving.
Exactly. To ensure that hospitals have sufficient cash flow to make payroll, keep the lights on, and ensure patients continue to receive uninterrupted care. You simply cannot have a system where, say, a rural hospital waits 6 months to get paid for a routine surgery.
Right, they would just go bankrupt within a quarter.
They absolutely would. So because that money must flow so quickly, the system pays the vast majority of claims first, and then, well, it audits a tiny fraction of them retrospectively.
Like after the fact.
Way after the fact. Sometimes these audits happen 6 months or even 2 years after the money has already been wired out of the government's accounts.
Wow, 2 years later.
Yeah, and this creates a massive control loop latency. During that lag time, errors remain entirely invisible to both the government and the provider.
So if a hospital software system has a recurring coding glitch.
That glitch just duplicates and compounds day after day after day. It's quietly inflating reimbursements across thousands of patient files.
And by the time an auditor actually looks at the file 2 years later, a tiny clerical mistake has turned into a multi-million-dollar overpayment.
Exactly. And then the chase begins, which is the second part of that name. Once the money is out the door and the error is finally spotted, the government has to deploy massive resources.
Right. They have to try and get it back.
They send investigators, they hire forensic auditors, they engage legal teams to try and claw that money back. It is an incredibly expensive, adversarial, and honestly time-consuming process.
And I imagine a lot of times the money is just gone.
Often, yeah. The money has already been spent on legitimate hospital operations, or in the case of actual fraud, it's been moved offshore. You simply cannot recover all of it.
It seems like such a backward way to do things.
It is. This dynamic is what the pioneer of continuous improvement, W. Edwards Deming, identified decades ago as a fundamental failure of system design. Deming argued that you can never, ever achieve quality through end-of-the-line inspection.
Because it's already too late.
Right. By the time you find a defect at the end of an assembly line, the waste has already occurred. You've already spent the time, the labor, and the materials building a flawed product.
So if checking for defects at the end of the line is the problem, the solution has to involve checking for them while the product is still being assembled.
Precisely.
And the source material points us toward a completely different industry to find a working model for this. An industry where end-of-the-line inspection isn't just financially expensive, it's physically fatal. Let's talk about the aviation industry, because I have to say, this comparison completely shifted how I view data systems.
Yeah, the aviation paradigm is really the conceptual anchor for this entire reform effort. If we go back, to the mid-20th century, the aviation industry actually accepted a surprisingly high rate of accidents.
Which is terrifying to think about now.
It is, but it was tragically considered the inherent cost of pushing the boundaries of physics, right? Flying massive metal tubes through unpredictable weather systems.
Right. So what happened when a plane went down?
Well, investigators would scour the wreckage trying to piece together what happened. It was the ultimate post-payment audit. They were investigating the crash after it had already occurred.
Which, sure, that might tell you why that specific plane crashed, but it doesn't do much for the people who were on it.
Exactly. And aviation leaders eventually realized that investigating wreckage wasn't enough to proactively prevent the next disaster. They needed to understand the systemic, subtle variations happening during the flight itself, long before those variations cascaded into a catastrophic failure.
They needed to see it happening in real time.
Right. They needed mid-flight telemetry.
Which led to the invention of the flight data recorder, the black box.
That was the turning point. Aviation implemented continuous data capture systems. Modern flight recorders monitor thousands of distinct data points in real time.
Like what kind of data points?
They track engine temperature fluctuations, altitude drift, microscopic changes in flap positions, hydraulic pressure, and crucially, they flag anomalies as they're happening.
So it's not just recording for later, it's actively warning people.
Exactly. If a sensor detects that the engine temperature is running even 2 degrees higher than the established baseline for that specific altitude and speed, it alerts the pilots and the ground crew immediately.
Wow.
This absolute devotion to proactive inspection and continuous telemetry fundamentally transformed the industry. Over the last 50 years, the fatal accident rate in commercial aviation dropped by over 90%.
That is incredible. They basically stopped accepting normal rates of loss.
They built a system that assumes error is possible at any second and monitors for it constantly.
Okay, so I understand how tracking a physical engine temperature saves a plane. But translating a physical black box to a digital medical claim for, say, a knee replacement, that feels like a bit of a leap.
It does seem like one at first glance.
Yeah, because we aren't dealing with physical heat or hydraulic pressure in a hospital billing department.
True. We aren't dealing with physical physics, but we are dealing with statistical physics. Data flows have expected mathematical normal ranges.
Okay, statistical physics. I like that term.
Yeah. The black box concept translates to real-time medical claim verification through a discipline called statistical process control.
And how does that work in practice?
Well, you establish a baseline of what a normal billing pattern looks like for a specific procedure in a specific region for a specific type of patient.
So you're tracking the digital temperature of the claim.
That is a highly accurate way to frame it. You are constantly measuring the variance. Just as a flight data recorder flags a mechanical anomaly mid-flight, real-time cloud analytics can scan millions of healthcare claims and flag a statistical variance before the money is dispersed.
Can you give me an example of what a spike in digital temperature looks like?
Sure. So if a clinic typically bills for, let's say, 30 physical therapy sessions a week, and suddenly that spikes to 300 sessions over a holiday weekend, that is a statistical temperature spike. The system catches that variance instantly.
Okay, I need to pause on this because my immediate thought is about the sheer scale of the system. If we flag every single statistical variance, aren't we just going to freeze the entire trillion-dollar infrastructure?
That is the big fear, yes.
Because you noted earlier that the money must flow to keep rural hospitals from going bankrupt. If an algorithm is suddenly stopping payments every time a doctor works late on a Friday and bills a few extra hours, we are going to crash the very system we are trying to save.
And that tension between security and velocity is the central challenge of the entire reform. But the goal here is targeted stabilization, not universal friction.
Targeted stabilization. What does that mean for the average claim?
Statistical process control does not mean stopping every claim. The vast majority of claims, well over 90%, fall comfortably within the expected statistical control limits. They're completely normal.
So they just go right through, right?
Instantly. The system recognizes them as normal, and those claims pass through the digital gateway without a hitch. The money continues to flow unimpeded.
So the system is only selectively pausing the outliers.
Right. The statistical anomalies are the only claims that hit a speed bump. And importantly, they aren't paused indefinitely to just gather dust on a desk. They are paused for immediate, targeted human review.
Got it.
The aviation model relies on nested layers of defense, which are essentially engineered redundancies. If one sensor misreads a situation, a secondary sensor provides context.
So it's not just one alarm going off in a vacuum.
Exactly. Having multiple overlapping checks isn't wasteful bureaucracy. It is a protective mechanism. It drastically reduces the need for massive, expensive rework later.
Because fixing a mistake before you pay for it is infinitely cheaper than trying to sue someone to get the money back 2 years later.
The math is undeniable. If the analytics catch a billing anomaly before the money transfers, it might cost a human analyst 10 minutes to review the file, call the hospital, and fix a simple clerical error.
Just a quick phone call.
Right. But if you let that same error pay out and compound for 2 years and then try to recover it, it costs thousands of dollars in legal fees, investigator hours, and administrative overhead.
Man, I see the vision here. We are taking the aviation philosophy, assume the system will drift, monitor the telemetry constantly, and fix the tiny deviations before they crash the budget.
That is the core idea.
But moving from the philosophy to the actual nuts and bolts is where these massive government projects usually fall apart, right?
Yeah.
How do we actually transition from a world of manual retroactive paper audits to automated cloud analytics?
So, the author, Push Durlari, addresses this transition with what he calls Brain Alert Number 1.
Brain alert number 1. Sounds important.
It is a non-negotiable prerequisite for the entire technological rearchitecture. The rule is simple. Data infrastructure must come before artificial intelligence.
Data before AI. It sounds like common sense, but I imagine it's a rule that gets broken constantly in the rush to adopt new tech.
Oh, it is the single most common point of failure in large-scale IT modernization. There is an immense temptation among political leaders and corporate executives to buy the newest, shiniest AI tool, plug it directly into their existing messy data silos, and just wait for miracles.
And I'm guessing miracles don't happen.
Never. Because advanced machine learning algorithms are only as good as the data they consume. If you deploy an anomaly detection model on fragmented, inconsistent, non-interoperable data systems, all the AI does is amplify the confusion.
It just flags everything.
Yeah, you end up building an incredibly expensive detection theater system. It generates beautiful flashing dashboards that look impressive to a board of directors, but it doesn't actually prevent a single improper payment.
Wow, detection theater. That's a great phrase. So step 1 isn't the algorithm. Step 1 is the plumbing.
Step 1 is achieving true data interoperability. You have to create a unified analytical environment across state and federal systems.
What does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, to put this in practical terms, under the current fragmented system, a rogue provider might have one identification number in the Texas Medicaid system and a completely different identifier in the federal Medicare system.
Oh, so they're treated like two different people.
Exactly. If they are running a complex billing scheme that spans across both systems, an AI looking at Texas data won't see the federal data. The computer thinks it's looking at two completely different individuals.
That's a huge blind spot.
So before you run any advanced analytics, you have to standardize unique provider IDs and ensure the disparate data streams can talk to each other seamlessly.
It's like trying to run an advanced spell checker on a massive document. But half the pages are written in Spanish, a quarter are in French, and the rest are in some proprietary code.
That is a perfect analogy.
The spell checker is just going to flag everything as an error because it doesn't understand the underlying language. You have to translate all the data into a common syntax first.
The translation layer is the absolute foundation. Once that foundational plumbing is secured, then and only then can you build out the machine learning sequence.
Okay, let's get into that sequence.
The blueprint structures this sequence in 4 distinct compounding layers.
Let's break down these 4 layers because I want to understand the mechanics of how this AI actually works on the ground. What is layer 1?
Layer 1 is prepayment screening. This is the direct replacement for the old post-payment audit. This layer utilizes rules-based machine learning and anomaly detection to scan every single incoming claim in real time.
Okay, so it's looking at everything as it comes in.
Yes, it serves as the frontline defense. The models in this layer are trained on known patterns of error or historical fraud. If a claim matches a known fingerprint of a bad bill, it is flagged and paused before the money leaves the Treasury.
So layer 1 is essentially the bouncer at the door, holding a clipboard with a list of known troublemakers and fake IDs. If you match the list, you don't get in.
Exactly right. But fraudsters are highly adaptive. When a specific billing scheme is blocked by Layer 1, they don't just give up and go home. They invent a new scheme.
Right, they pivot.
And that brings us to Layer 2, pattern intelligence. This layer utilizes something called unsupervised learning.
How does unsupervised learning differ from the first layer?
Well, Layer 1 knows exactly what it's looking for. Unsupervised learning, on the other hand, is not given a predefined list of bad behaviors. Instead, it scans the vast, multidimensional ocean of daily claims data, looking for novel, evolving clusters of activity.
Things that don't have a fingerprint yet.
Exactly. It maps relationships that a human could never spot. For example, it might notice that 3 different independent clinics, located in 3 different cities, suddenly all start billing for the exact same rare respiratory treatment, on the exact same days of the week, using the exact same billing codes.
Oh, wow. So it's looking for the invisible red strings connecting seemingly unrelated events. It's flagging coordination that hasn't even been classified as fraud yet.
Yes. The unsupervised models group these anomalous behaviors together and alert human investigators to a developing pattern. It allows the system to detect new schemes as they are forming, rather than waiting a year to realize a new loophole is being exploited.
That is wild. Okay, so what happens in layer 3?
From there, we move to Layer 3, provider risk profiling. This shifts the focus from the individual claims to the providers themselves. The system uses predictive models to score providers based on specialty norms and peer comparisons.
Comparing a doctor against their peer seems like a delicate process, honestly. How does it account for, say, a doctor who simply treats sicker patients and legitimately needs to bill more?
That's a great question. The algorithms cluster providers based on numerous variables: geography, patient demographics, specialty, facility type.
This is comparing apples to apples.
Exactly. If you are a cardiologist in rural Ohio treating an aging population, your billing patterns are compared against other cardiologists in similar rural environments treating similar demographics.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. But if you're billing for a specific highly lucrative diagnostic test is suddenly 400% higher than your exact peer group, your risk profile score increases.
Which doesn't necessarily mean you're a criminal.
No, it doesn't automatically mean you are committing fraud, but it does mean your future claims will undergo a higher degree of Layer 1 scrutiny.
The system adjusts the magnifying glass based on historical behavior. I get it. That leads to the final layer. What is Layer 4?
Layer 4 is system learning. This is the crucial supervised learning component that creates a continuous feedback loop.
A feedback loop. So it's talking to the human analysts.
Yes. Every time Layer 1 or Layer 2 flags a claim, a human analyst eventually reviews it. If the analyst confirms it was indeed an improper payment, they feed that confirmation back into the system.
So the system gets smarter about what to look for.
Right. And if it was a false positive, perhaps the doctor had a perfectly valid, documented medical reason for the anomaly. The analyst tells the system, "You were wrong. This variance is legitimate."
Oh, so it learns from its mistakes, too.
Exactly. Layer 4 takes that human feedback and updates the weights and parameters of all the previous layers. This makes the entire architecture smarter, more precise, and less prone to false alarms every single day.
The progression here is incredible. We are basically moving from a manual spell checker run at the very end of a 500-page book to a highly advanced, context-aware autocorrect that literally learns the specific vocabulary of the author as they type.
That is a brilliant way to put it. And the capability to do this is not science fiction. The core technologies driving these 4 layers are actively used today in the financial sector to detect credit card fraud, in global logistics to route shipping containers, and in cybersecurity.
So the tech is already there.
The tech is there. The gap preventing healthcare from adopting this isn't technical readiness. The gap is governance readiness.
Governance readiness, you mean like the human side of the equation?
Yes. The human policies, the organizational structures, and the workforce capacity required to actually manage the technology.
Because you can't just turn it on and walk away.
Right. Think about the physical reality of a claims processing center. If Layer 1 is suddenly activated and flags 10,000 claims on the very first morning, who reviews them?
10,000. Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
What happens when the human reviewers are physically overwhelmed by the volume of alerts? You run into a well-documented human factors crisis known as alert fatigue.
Oh, sure. If my phone buzzes with an emergency alert every 5 minutes, eventually I'm just going to turn off my notifications.
Exactly. Human nature dictates that if a claims processor screen is flashing red with 500 alerts a day, they will eventually just start hitting approve all to clear their queue and go home.
And the moment the staff starts ignoring the alerts, your billion-dollar AI system becomes a very expensive paperweight.
Exactly. So governance readiness means establishing clear, realistic escalation protocols before you turn the machine on. You have to aggressively tune the AI layers to minimize nuisance alerts.
Are there metrics for that? Like, how do you know if there are too many alerts?
Yes, the blueprint establishes a harsh metric. If the alert dismissal rate, meaning the staff are overriding the AI flags without deep review, exceeds 40%, it indicates the AI is producing noise, not intelligence.
Wow, 40% is the cutoff.
Right. When that happens, governance protocols dictate that you must stop, recalibrate the models, and redesign the human interface.
I want to highlight why this specific point matters immensely to anyone listening who interacts with the healthcare system.
Please do.
The immediate fear of implementing AI in healthcare billing is that an algorithm is going to inexplicably freeze a doctor's payments, right? The clinic will shut down, and patients will literally lose access to care. But the blueprint outlines a very specific operational standard to prevent that bottleneck.
It does. The operational gold standard for this architecture is the 12-hour resolution rule. The goal is to clear 95% of flagged claims within 12 hours.
That is incredibly fast for a government process. Honestly, how is that even possible?
It requires highly automated workflows. If a claim is flagged for, say, a missing signature or an incompatible diagnostic code, the system doesn't just put it in a pile for a human to review next week.
It does something proactively.
Yes, it instantaneously sends an automated secure request back to the provider's software asking for this specific missing data point.
Just pings them right away.
Exactly. If the provider uploads the correct data, the AI clears the flag and authorizes payment all within hours.
Oh, that's amazing.
The objective is to create friction for bad actors who cannot produce the required documentation while ensuring fluid, frictionless payment for legitimate providers who are just making honest mistakes.
Okay, so we have the conceptual blueprint. We know we need data interoperability before AI. We understand the 4 layers of machine learning. And we recognize the absolute necessity of human governance to manage alert fatigue.
We have the theory.
Right.
Yeah.
But deploying this is the real test. You cannot just flip a master switch in Washington, D.C. and deploy untested anomaly detection across 50 different state systems simultaneously. The fallout would be catastrophic.
Oh, in any massive systems engineering project, a simultaneous national rollout is a recipe for disaster. You must sandbox the technology first.
Create a controlled environment.
Right. You create a controlled, bounded environment to validate your assumptions, stress test the middleware, and measure the real-world impact on human behavior. In this 36-month reform plan, that controlled environment is designated as the Sentinel State Pilot.
The Sentinel State Pilot. So the plan requires selecting a single state to act as the testing ground for this entirely new military-grade inspection architecture.
Yes.
And they aren't going to boil the ocean, right? They aren't testing the AI on every single medical procedure in that state. The blueprint outlines a specific priority order for the types of medical billing they will scrutinize first.
Correct. The Sentinel State Pilot will initially target 3 specific high-risk billing categories: durable medical equipment, home health services, and inpatient rehabilitation billing.
Why isolate those 3 areas? I mean, why not start with something simpler, like standard visits to a primary care physician?
Because standard clinical visits generally have a lower rate of massive systemic fraud. Durable medical equipment, home health, and inpatient rehab historically exhibit significantly elevated improper payment rates. They have the most vulnerable pressure points in the entire system.
Let's talk about durable medical equipment, or DME. What does that actually cover, and why is it so vulnerable?
DME covers items like motorized wheelchairs, specialized oxygen equipment, and CPAP machines. And it has long been a target for organized fraud rings.
Really? Wheelchairs?
Yes. The equipment carries a very high dollar value, and the supply chains can be incredibly opaque. It is relatively easy for a bad actor to fabricate prescriptions or to bill the government for a top-tier, custom-fitted wheelchair while actually delivering a cheap, standard model to the patient.
Oh, I see. The physical variance in the equipment makes it easy to hide the financial fraud. What about home health services? Why are those on the priority list?
Home health services are notoriously difficult to monitor because the care occurs behind closed doors in private residences. There is very little systemic visibility.
There's no hospital administrator walking the halls.
Exactly. It
Ugh.
creates opportunities to bill for nursing visits that never occurred or to artificially inflate the duration of a visit. By targeting these specific high-variance areas first, the Sentinel State pilot can demonstrate maximum financial value immediately.
And I guess if the AI can catch fraud in a messy area like home health, it can catch it anywhere.
That's the logic. If the models can successfully detect and manage the incredibly complex fraud patterns inherent in durable medical equipment, proving the tech works on the hardest problems, applying it to routine clinical visits later becomes a trivial exercise.
The logic makes perfect sense from a data science perspective.
Oh, yeah.
But let me view this through a political lens for a second.
Okay.
If I am the governor of a state, why would I ever volunteer my state's healthcare system to be the guinea pig for a massive, unprecedented federal AI experiment?
It's a tough sell.
Right, because if the software glitches, local hospitals don't get paid, the evening news runs endless segments about vulnerable seniors losing their home health aides, and I lose my next election. The political risk seems entirely asymmetrical to the reward.
The political risk is profound, which is precisely why the selection criteria for the Sentinel State are incredibly stringent. The federal government isn't just going to pick a state at random.
What are they looking for?
First, the candidate state needs to have a moderate, well-documented baseline error rate. You do not want to select a state with a flawlessly run system because there won't be enough variance to train the AI, and you won't be able to measure meaningful improvement.
That makes sense.
Conversely, you avoid states whose systems are entirely dysfunctional because the baseline data will be too chaotic to establish reliable control limits.
You need a Goldilocks state.
Exactly. Second, the state must possess adequate existing data infrastructure. The pilot is only 36 months long. You cannot spend the first 2 years just trying to upgrade a state's 1990s-era servers.
They need a foundation to build on. But again, how do you mitigate the political fallout for that governor?
It requires absolute ironclad bipartisan support. You need leadership across both parties in the state legislature to commit to the pilot.
To share the blame if it goes wrong.
Essentially, yes. This ensures that a sudden shift in political power or a gubernatorial election midway through the 3-year process doesn't result in the pilot being abruptly canceled just for partisan optics.
Is there a financial incentive for the state?
A massive one. To sweeten the deal, the federal government provides huge technical and financial assistance. The state receives millions of dollars in federal expertise and software upgrades, allowing them to modernize their aging infrastructure without draining their own state budget.
It's an opportunity to rebuild the house using someone else's money.
Precisely.
Okay, so once the Sentinel state is chosen and the system is turned on, how do we evaluate it? The blueprint is intensely focused on measurable standards. We can't just rely on a feeling that we're catching more fraud, right?
Right. Feelings don't govern trillion-dollar systems.
Exactly. So there are very specific year-one key performance indicators, KPIs, that must be hit at the 18-month evaluation mark. What exactly are we measuring to define success?
The KPIs are rigorous, and they are completely non-negotiable. The first is a pure financial metric. A 15% reduction in the improper payment rate within that first operational year.
15%.
Yes. If the state was historically losing $1 billion a year to waste and fraud in those specific categories, the pilot must demonstrably prove it saved $150 million.
That's a hard number. What's the second KPI?
The second KPI measures velocity. The average flag to resolution time must be under 5 business days for 90% of cases.
Okay, so we mentioned the 12-hour gold standard earlier, but 5 days is the hard ceiling for the vast majority of alerts.
Right. This metric proves that the AI isn't simply trading fraud reduction for a massive bureaucratic logjam. The system must remain fluid.
And what about the accuracy of the AI itself? We talked about false alarms.
The third KPI addresses exactly that. The false positive rate must remain under 8%.
8%. Why that specific number?
Because if the anomaly detection models are flagging thousands of perfectly legitimate claims, forcing honest doctors to submit endless appeals and paperwork to prove their innocence, the system will collapse under provider backlash.
The doctors will just revolt.
Absolutely. Keeping false positives under 8% is the mathematical proof that the supervised learning feedback loops, that layer 4 we talked about, are actually functioning and the models are achieving high precision.
There is one final KPI, and to me, it's the one that anchors the entire project in reality.
It's the most important one.
Right. The pilot must prove there is no measurable reduction in beneficiary service utilization.
That is the ultimate ethical and operational safeguard. If you drop improper payments by 15%, but the data shows a corresponding 10% drop in elderly patients receiving necessary oxygen equipment,
Yeah.
you haven't fixed the system.
You have simply restricted access to care.
Exactly. The data must definitively prove that legitimate patients are still receiving exactly the same level of care they need without delay. If the pilot fails this specific KPI, it is considered a complete failure, regardless of how much money it saved.
Wow. Okay, so we have the technology sequence, we understand the Sentinel State sandbox, and we have these hard metrics for success. Now, we need to map this out on a calendar. Let's look at the actual project management timeline. How do we get from a signed piece of paper on day 1 to a transformed system in year 3?
The entire 36-month roadmap is structured around a foundational concept from the science of continuous improvement called the PDCA cycle.
PDCA. What does that stand for?
Plan, do, check, act. It's a cyclical framework that ensures reform is treated as a living, breathing process of iteration, rather than a rigid document that fails upon first contact with reality.
Okay, let's walk through the milestones using that PDCA framework. We start with the plan phase, which covers months 1 through 6. This is the foundation. What is practically happening during this first half year?
Months 1 through 6 involve intense logistical and legislative preparation. The federal government selects the Sentinel State and begins mapping the integration. Simultaneously, legal teams must begin drafting the enabling legislation that will eventually give this entire architecture permanent statutory authority.
But on the ground, what's happening in the billing offices?
The most critical operational task in this phase is conducting a human factors audit.
I'm fascinated by this concept. What does a human factors audit actually entail for a billing department?
It circles back to our discussion on alert fatigue. Before you introduce sophisticated AI tools to frontline compliance staff, you must intimately understand their current reality.
How do you do that?
Human factors engineers literally sit behind claims processors and map every single decision point they make. They quantify the cognitive demand.
So they're watching where they click, what screens they open.
Exactly. If the audit reveals that a processor reviewing inpatient rehab claims is currently forced to navigate 6 different legacy software screens, cross-reference 2 different databases, and manually input a 12-digit code just to verify a physician's signature, you cannot simply layer a flashing AI alert system on top of that workflow.
Right, the human will just break.
The human will break. You have to fix the environment before you introduce the new tool.
So you simplify their existing job first.
You redesign the workflow to default to safe. You make the correct action the path of least cognitive resistance. You ensure the interface is clean and intuitive. You solve the human interface problem before you ever activate the machine learning models.
Which brings us to the do phase, months 6 to 12.
Yeah.
Activation. What happens here?
At month 6, the Sentinel State pilot officially goes live. The Layer 1 prepayment statistical screening is activated across durable medical equipment, home health, and inpatient rehab. The initial baseline is set.
And what's happening at the federal level during this time?
At the federal level, the proposed enabling legislation is published for public debate. They also establish an interstate learning network framework.
What does that learning network do?
It is a crucial communication tool. It allows the other 49 states to observe the Sentinel State's progress, review their data, and begin preparing their own legacy systems for eventual integration.
Okay, we roll into year 2. Months 12 to 18 is the scaling tech phase.
Right. During the 6-month window, the pilot state begins deploying the more advanced AI capabilities. They activate Layer 2 unsupervised pattern intelligence and Layer 3 predictive risk profiling.
And they test out provider incentives, right?
Yes, they launch an incentive redesign pilot to test how medical providers react to new financial motivations, which is a massive component we need to explore deeply in a moment. By the end of month 18, the core pilot has been running and gathering data for a full year.
That brings us to the most critical juncture, the check phase, months 18 to 24, evaluation.
This is the crucible for the entire project. An independent third-party evaluation team, not the people who built the system, but external auditors, comes in and assesses the Sentinel State's performance against those strict KPIs we outlined earlier.
So they measure the 15% financial reduction, the 5-day resolution speed.
The false positive rate, and they verify that patient access to care remained completely stable. The evaluation findings are fully transparent and published publicly. Concurrently, Congress reviews this hard data to inform the final passage of the permanent legislation.
I want to highlight a detail here that completely changes how I view government projects.
Okay.
The blueprint includes a built-in fail-safely mechanism. It acknowledges upfront that this massive, complex experiment might actually fail.
Yes. It is arguably the most mature and realistic aspect of the entire design. Brain alert number 2 in the text specifically states that you must pre-commit to your success criteria before you launch the pilot.
Meaning you can't move the goalposts later.
Exactly. If the independent evaluation at month 24 shows that the pilot definitively failed to meet the KPIs, the pilot terminates cleanly.
It just ends. It doesn't become a zombie program limping along for a decade, burning cash just to save face.
The author argues forcefully that termination in this context is not a failure of governance. It is the ultimate success of the scientific method.
That's a great way to look at it.
If you spend $50 million on a pilot and the real-world data proves that the specific AI models are flawed or the state-level governance structures can't handle the alert volume, you publish those negative findings.
And you save billions.
That $50 million investment just prevented you from rolling out a catastrophic $5 billion national mistake. You learn from the check phase, you act by adjusting your fundamental hypotheses, and you start a new cycle.
But let's assume the evaluation is a resounding success. The KPIs are hit, the data is solid. That triggers the final phase. Months, 24 to 36, national scaling. What does that look like?
Based on the validated evidence, you begin scaling the statistical process control infrastructure nationally. You start onboarding cohorts of new states using a framework called the Integrity Compact.
And by the end of year 3,
By the end of month 36, you have methodically transitioned the entire national architecture from a reactive pay and chase model to a proactive, cloud-based, continuous inspection system.
that is the elegant, beautifully structured timeline on paper. But, an elegant timeline is just theory. Reform of this magnitude requires execution by thousands of human beings across 50 different jurisdictions, and human systems are inherently messy and resistant to change.
Extremely resistant to change.
Right. How do we overcome the massive technical and political friction this 36-month rollout will inevitably face?
The friction will be immense, and it falls into two broad categories: technical hurdles and political hurdles. Let's analyze the technical hurdles first.
Okay, what's the biggest technical nightmare?
The single biggest technical nightmare is the unification of disparate legacy state data systems. You are dealing with 50 individual states, each maintaining their own Medicaid IT infrastructure.
And they're all different.
Vastly different. A few states have modern, cloud-based architectures. Many others are running on ancient, on-premise mainframes held together by digital duct tape and decades of patched code.
If the AI requires standardized data to function, how do you make a 1980s mainframe in one state talk to the modern federal cloud? You can't ask every state to rebuild their entire IT system from scratch. That would take a decade and billions of dollars.
You don't ask them to rebuild. This is where specialized data technology partners play a crucial role by deploying something called middleware.
Middleware. How does that work?
Middleware acts as a universal translation layer. The federal tech partners install this layer on top of the state's existing legacy system.
So it sits between the old tech and the new AI.
Exactly. The middleware reaches down into the old mainframe, extracts the necessary claims data, translates it into the standardized, modern API format that the AI requires, and feeds it into the federal analytics engine.
And it does this without breaking the old system.
It does all of this in real time, without disrupting or delaying the state's normal day-to-day operations. It bridges the technological gap without requiring a ground-up rebuild.
Okay, the middleware solves the hardware friction. But what about the political friction? The blueprint explicitly mentions the issue of state sovereignty and something called the anti-commandeering doctrine. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so how does a legal doctrine threaten a software rollout?
It's a fascinating constitutional hurdle that often derails federal initiatives. The federal government, under Supreme Court precedents like Prince v. United States, cannot simply commandeer state governments and force them to execute federal regulatory programs.
So they can't just order the states to do it.
Right. Congress cannot pass a law mandating that Texas and California must adopt a new federal AI inspection system and further dictate that state taxpayers must fund the staff to run it. If they tried, the states would sue the federal government, and based on the anti-commandeering doctrine, the states would likely win.
If the federal government cannot mandate participation, How do you convince 50 independent governors to voluntarily hand over their data streams to a new federal oversight board?
You utilize a concept known as cooperative federalism, operationalized in this blueprint through the Integrity Compact. It is a purely incentive-based model.
Meaning you bribe them, essentially.
In a legal, policy-driven way, yes. The federal government approaches the states and offers to cover the entire cost of the middleware installation, the AI analytics suite, and provides massive ongoing technical assistance.
Free upgrade.
Yes, that technical assistance is vital. It acts as a political lubricant. States often resist federal mandates not out of pure ideological stubbornness, but because state agencies simply lack the resources, bandwidth, and technical expertise to comply with complex new rules.
They just don't have the people to do it.
Exactly. If the federal government provides the tools and the experts at no cost to the state, the administrative resistance melts away.
And there's a massive financial carrot attached to the Integrity Compact as well, isn't there?
A profound one. Under the Integrity Compact, if a state voluntarily implements the new system and successfully reduces their improper payment rate, they enter into a shared savings model.
So they get a cut.
The state gets to keep a significant percentage of the federal funds they help recover or prevent from leaking. You fundamentally alter the dynamic. You convert federal compliance from a budget-draining administrative burden into a lucrative revenue-generating opportunity for the state treasury.
Wow. Okay, so we've talked about governors and federal agencies. Let's bring this down to the ground level. Think about the frontline healthcare workers.
The people actually doing the billing.
Exactly. If I am a hospital administrator or a frontline medical coder who is already exhausted, drowning in paperwork and fighting with insurance companies every single day, why on earth would I willingly participate in some new, highly scrutinized AI reporting protocol? My immediate assumption is that this is just Big Brother looking over my shoulder to find reasons to deny my claims.
And that is a perfectly valid fear. This brings us to what I consider the most vital behavioral insight in the entire text: incentive architecture.
Incentive architecture.
Yes. The author points out that our current reimbursement system has a deeply perverse incentive structure. Currently, the system rewards volume and complexity. The more complex the billing code you use, the more you get paid.
Which encourages upcoding.
Right. Furthermore, the only motivator for accurate compliance is the fear of a random audit. But because those audits are statistically rare, the expected financial cost of non-compliance is actually lower than the administrative cost of strict compliance.
Wait, really? It's mathematically cheaper to cheat.
For a massive hospital network, it is mathematically cheaper to occasionally pay a multi-million-dollar audit fine every 5 years than it is to hire and maintain an army of perfectly accurate compliance coders year-round.
That is a terrifying realization. The math makes it cheaper to be careless. How does the 36-month plan flip that script? How do we make compliance easier and more profitable than non-compliance?
The blueprint outlines 3 specific strategies to incentivize provider participation and change the behavioral math. The first is compliance simplification.
What does that mean for the provider?
If a provider adopts the new reporting protocols, integrates with the data streams, and demonstrates a consistent multi-month record of accurate, low-risk billing, the system drastically reduces their daily administrative burden. They face significantly fewer documentation requirements for routine services.
It's essentially TSA pre-check for medical billing.
Yeah.
You submit to the background check, you prove over time that you aren't a threat to the system, and in exchange, you get to keep your shoes on and breeze through the security line while everyone else takes off their belts.
The underlying mechanism there is exactly the same: rewarding trust with reduced friction.
What's the second strategy?
The second strategy is positive recognition. Providers who maintain excellent statistical stability within their peer group receive expedited claims processing.
They get paid faster.
Exactly. Their reimbursements are pushed to the front of the line, improving their cash flow. They are formally granted reduced audit frequencies, removing the shadow of constant investigation. They might even achieve a preferred provider status that they can use to attract patients. You transform integrity from an invisible expectation into a competitive business advantage.
And the third strategy brings the shared savings model down to the individual provider level, right?
It does. If a massive health network invests their own resources to innovate a new internal workflow that drastically reduces coding errors, and that innovation saves the Medicare program millions of dollars, the network gets to keep a percentage of those savings as a performance bonus.
That is brilliant.
You stop treating providers purely as potential suspects, and you start treating them as active, incentivized partners in program integrity. When you align the financial incentives so that doing the right thing is simultaneously the easiest and most profitable thing, organizational behavior changes practically overnight.
Let's take a step back and look at the whole board. We've designed a proactive, aviation-inspired safety system. We've tested it in a Sentinel state to ensure the AI doesn't crash patient care. We have a 36-month roadmap. We have middleware to bridge the legacy technology gap, and we have TSA pre-check style incentives to get the doctors and governors on board.
That's a comprehensive plan.
It is. But here is the multi-billion-dollar question. How do we actually pay to build this massive architecture? And perhaps more importantly, how do we ensure the next political administration doesn't just dismantle it to score cheap political points by claiming they are cutting red tape?
The ultimate question of sustainability.
Right. That brings us to our final core topic: long-term sustainability, return on investment, and legislative action.
If you want an architecture of this scale to survive, you cannot rely on the fleeting goodwill of whoever happens to be sitting in the Oval Office or whoever is currently running the Department of Health and Human Services. Political winds change too quickly.
You need something permanent.
You need structural permanence. The blueprint achieves this permanence through the legislative creation of the Healthcare Integrity Board, or the HIB.
What exactly is the Healthcare Integrity Board, and what kind of specific legislative approvals do we need from Congress to bring it into existence?
A national rollout requires Congress to pass legislation establishing the HIB as an independent federal entity, structurally similar to the Federal Reserve or the National Transportation Safety Board. It requires statutory independence.
So they can't just be bossed around by a cabinet secretary.
Exactly. The board members would have fixed term appointments. The blueprint suggests 7-year terms. Crucially, these terms are staggered, so they intentionally do not align with 4-year presidential election cycles.
Oh, that's clever.
It structurally prevents any single incoming president from firing the entire board and replacing them with political loyalists who might want to weaken oversight. Furthermore, the legislation would mandate that the HIB reports directly to Congress rather than being buried under the executive branch, ensuring transparent, bipartisan accountability.
So they have political armor to protect the mission.
Yeah.
But they still need money to operate the cloud analytics, pay the data partners, and fund the state technical assistance. How do we fund this massive new agency without adding billions of dollars to the national debt?
This is where the blueprint introduces an absolutely brilliant funding mechanism. The legislation must explicitly stipulate that the HIB should never rely on annual discretionary appropriations from Congress for its core operating budget.
Because the moment Congress gets into a partisan budget standoff or threatens a government shutdown, the funding for oversight is the first thing that gets slashed in a compromise.
Precisely the danger. Instead, the legislation dictates that the HIB is funded by a dedicated, fixed fraction of the improper payment recoveries and preventions that it generates.
The oversight board literally pays for itself.
It creates a self-reinforcing financial engine. Better, AI-driven oversight produces more recovered funds and prevents more fraudulent payments. A tiny fraction of those billions in saved funds automatically flows back into the HIB's operating budget.
So they use that money to fund even better AI models.
Yes. They hire smarter data scientists, they upgrade the tech, which prevents even more losses the next year. It conceptually converts the oversight function from a burdensome budget expense that politicians constantly want to cut into a self-sustaining, revenue-generating investment.
I want to break down the math on that return on investment because the numbers are staggering. The blueprint estimates the total cost of the Sentinel state pilot is around $50 to $100 million.
Correct.
Once you scale the cloud analytics, the middleware, the statistical process control infrastructure, and the massive technical assistance nationally, you are looking at an ongoing operational cost of maybe $200 to $500 million annually. If we add in state-level grants, let's call it a total maximum national investment of $1.3 billion a year.
And to the average taxpayer, $1.3 billion sounds like a massive new government expense.
It does sound massive.
Yeah.
But we have to remember our opening hook. The current system is losing $100 billion a year. The math in the text shows that a mere 10% reduction in improper payments yields $7 to $10 billion in annual savings.
The ROI is undeniable. You spend $1.3 billion to save $10 billion. That is nearly an 800% return on investment in the very first year.
Wow.
And if the system continues to learn and matches the success rate of other high-consequence industries like aviation, eventually achieving a 20% reduction in improper payments, you are saving $15 to $20 billion annually.
It completely reframes the conversation. It is a revenue-generating asset, not a tax burden.
The deeper implication here is that the HIB shifts healthcare oversight from being a political football kicked around during election years and neglected the rest of the time into an architecture of permanence. Systemic stability requires a constancy of purpose that extends far beyond 2-year or 4-year electoral timelines.
And the Healthcare Integrity Board is how that constancy of purpose is engineered directly into law.
Exactly.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground today. Let's trace the arc of this journey one last time for you, the listener. We started with the jarring realization that our medical billing system operates on a reactive, pay-and-chase model that inherently hemorrhages billions of dollars.
Structural failure.
Right. We learned that the solution requires us to look to the sky, adopting the continuous telemetry of aviation safety. By treating medical claims like flight data recorders, we can establish baseline temperatures and pause the 1% of statistical anomalies for rapid human review before the financial plane crashes.
Proactive, not reactive.
We explored the absolute necessity of data interoperability plumbing before AI and walked through the 4 compounding layers of machine learning, from simple rule-based screening to unsupervised pattern intelligence. We stress-tested this concept in a Sentinel state sandbox, targeting highly vulnerable areas like durable medical equipment with strict fail-safe evaluation metrics.
Using the PDCA cycle.
Exactly. We mapped out a rigorous 36-month roadmap using that Plan-Do-Check Act cycle, ensuring human factors are addressed before the algorithms are turned on. We navigated the complex political minefield of state sovereignty using cooperative federalism and middleware. And we learned how to align human behavior by incentivizing doctors with TSA PreCheck-style compliance simplification.
Flipping the math on compliance.
And finally, we locked this entire architecture in with an independent, self-funding healthcare integrity board that turns a $1 billion expense into a $10 billion savings.
It is a profound masterclass in treating a systemic structural problem with a systemic structural solution, rather than relying on the tired, ineffective methods of post-incident blame and heavy-handed enforcement.
As we sign off today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We've spent this time exploring how a military-grade, precision-engineered inspection architecture, combined with a continuous improvement culture, can save billions in healthcare without compromising patient service.
It's a powerful model.
The implications of this go far beyond medicine. What would happen if we applied this exact same 36-month blueprint, this exact same model of real-time telemetry, unsupervised learning, and independent self-funding oversight to other massive complex public systems?
No, absolutely.
What if we applied it to national infrastructure grants or the Department of Defense budget itself? If we can proactively stop the bleeding of $100 billion a year in healthcare by simply changing how we inspect the data, where else is the jagged white line of a broken system hiding in plain sight, just waiting for the right digital X-ray to reveal it? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the design of the systems around you.